Alright, I'm back for part two. Sorry, I had to cut it short there, so my tape was getting ready to run out, so I had to get a new one. Um, so, we left off with Vicky getting killed. Jenny and Paul are coming back down from the bar. They're going back into the cabin, and they realize there's a lot of stuff going on. Lights have went out. Everybody's missing. So, they go up to find out that there's a bloody bed all over the place, and then as they open, they got all that. They find out that there's people dead, and certain people they do see that have died. But a lot of the bodies have been hidden because Jason, or the supposed Jason, as far as the audience goes, who've not seen this, go in there and he's got to put them up in a shed. But getting to that part, Jason goes off, or excuse me, Jenny and Paul are in the room, and all of a sudden she thinks somebody's in the room with them, and somebody's in the room. She says the F word, but she says is in the room, and then Paul gets knocked out, and you presumably think he's dead. And then she starts running away, and she goes into the cabin, and she goes underneath the bed, and she sees a little rat or a mouse, and it looks like she has peed herself a little bit because she sees water coming out through the bottom of the bed. And Jason is looking around, and you think that he walks out the door. Somehow he creeped across there and stood on a chair while she's sliding the door, and ends up trying to kill her with a pitchfork. But that doesn't work. Now she runs off, and she goes into the. I skipped the part where she's in a room, and she sees Crazy Ralph come popping out of the closet because she's in the bathroom, and Jason's trying to grab her through the window, and forgot to mention that part. But she goes running into the woods, and she ends up running into Jason's cabin, a little shack or whatever you want to call it. It ends up in there, and so she goes into one spot, and she realizes and opens the door, and there's Jason's mother's head with candles around it with a bunch of dead bodies. Now, the one scene that you see is Terry laying all around across there, and you see another body laying over here and a couple more over there, but then you see the skeleton lying on the floor with a pick in her head. Now, when I originally saw this film, I didn't realize that. I didn't notice that part. It wasn't until maybe a couple years later I actually noticed that. But there's a skeleton with an ice pick in the head. That's how Alice got killed. So, but go back to the movie. She stands there, and she sees there's a sweater underneath the neck of the head, the head there, and she knows Jason's following her, so she puts on the sweater and grabs this machete that's sitting there, and Jason opens up the door, and she's saying, Jason, mother is talking to you. Now, what Jason sees is his mother's image of her face. Now, that's where Betsy Palmer comes into this film. That's the only scene that she's in this film. She has been, to get off the storyline here, she has been offered to play in numerous other Friday the 13th films, but turned them down. But this was the only time where she went from the first one, came back into the second one to show her face, where Jason is imagining Jenny to be his mother. But eventually, Jenny turns a certain way, and Jason catches it through his eye and sees that it's his mother right there, and she's not the mother. So she starts to cut him, and then he ends up with a little axe and slices her leg, and somehow Paul comes jumping out of nowhere and comes in there and starts wrestling around with Jason, and in the mist she grabs the machete and he chops it right into his arm, and it's like stuck into his arm, and so she's like, oh, because she's limping a little bit, and she realizes Paul's there, so him and Paul are starting to walk away, and she takes off, which Jason at this time, he did not have the hockey mask until part 3, so he's wearing like a potato sack, pillowcase, however you want to call it, over his face, where he has a little eye hole that you can see. And so she takes it off, and she says, Jesus, or Paul says Jesus, and then they walk away, and they go back to the main cabin. or not the main cabin. They go back to the cabin that Jenny had been sleeping in, and she's crying, and all of a sudden she hears this noise. So Paul goes up to open the door and realizes that the dog that's there, Muffin, or whatever the dog's name was, and Paul opens and lets the door. The dog starts to run in, and all of a sudden you hear this crash the back behind of her window, and here's Jason with no mask over his face. His hair's hanging, one side of his hair's missing, and long hair. His face is all distorted, and comes jumping in there and grabbing Jenny and pulls her out through the window. Then it leads, and then you go white, and then all of a sudden she's on the gurney of an ambulance where the police are putting her into an ambulance, and she says, "Where's Paul?" Very good question. Where is Paul? She gets into the ambulance, it drives off, then it goes into the end scene where you see Jason's mother head just sitting there, and it goes to black. Now, when I saw this film for the first time, I was like, okay, so Jason returns. He didn't drown. He returns from the dead. He has a mask over his face. He ends up killing a bunch of counselors. He lives in a little shack, which I thought was pretty interesting. That I guess he would be like he was born in the 40s, I believe. So he'd be like in his mid-30s at this time. So he's living in this little shack that's got like a little toilet, obviously no plumbing, and he's got a little spot where there's a mirror and stuff like that. I thought it was quite interesting that he was staying in a little shack like that. So kind of like he would go out hunting and killing whatever animals or whatever, and come in there and eat, and then sit there and worship his mom's head. But yeah, so going back to the end of the movie, after I saw it, I thought, where is Paul? What happened to Paul? I mean, even to this day, it's been talked about for 35 years that in the scene, you suspect that with her going into the cabin, that little shack, and then Jason getting cut in the shoulder, and then Paul rescuing him and bringing him there, that he was actually alive then. So, in the real world, you think that he died at the cabin and she walked herself back to there, but all of it was a dream. Now, in my mind, in my opinion, I think that Paul was actually dead. He was dead in the cabin the first time. She goes to the shack. She ends up cutting and slicing Jason into the shoulder, and she walks back to the cabin, and she was thinking that Paul was alive, or she got knocked out in the shack, and then she realized, she wakes up, she walks back to the cabin, and then that's where they find the ambulance find Jenny there in the cabin. But that's not ever said. But and if you read the Crystal Lake Memories, and you read the book script that came out for the novelization for the movie, is that Jason's mother's head, when it focuses on her head, she blinks her eyes or something like that to make everybody realize that she did kill Paul or something, or Jason had killed Paul. Well, anyway, I mean, that there is no way that you can nitpick this thing to death and say, well, Paul was really dead in the cabin. Paul actually died in the shack. Paul was actually just a memory, and when she was sitting there, and maybe Paul ran off and realized that he would be the main target of all the killings, so he left. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm here to talk about is my reaction to Friday the 13th Part 2, my review and my discussion. I still like the movie. It's not my favorite of the entire series. The thing I liked about it was, like I told you, I liked that Jason had a little shack, and you had a little storyline with Crazy Ralph, even though he died really shortly. Pamela Voorhees, Mrs. Voorhees shows back up with a face in there. I don't know why I said Pamela Springsteen. That's from Sleepaway Camps, which I will do. I'll do a review and discussion on those films too. But yeah, she shows up even though it's just like an image of her head, and you got some good acting, great acting, a great heroine played by Amy Steele. Um, Great supporting stars. The makeup was not that bad. The guy who did the makeup, Carl Fullerton, he actually went on to do a lot. He does a lot of work for Denzel Washington. Um, Now, the one thing I forgot to mention is that the actor who played Jason, Warrington Gillette, was billed as playing Jason. And in recent years, as years go by, you realize that Steve Dash is actually the one who played Jason. Now, the only part that Warrington Gillette had played Jason is the part where he comes crashing through the window and you see his full face. But that it's been debated about it forever and ever and ever. And as far as I'm concerned, after watching the film years later and discussing and hearing discussions and documentaries about that, I think actually Steve Dash should have been billed as Jason Voorhees because he played the majority of the film, running through the woods, in the shack. Anything that had to do with the sack over his head was actually him. And Warrington Gillette gets all the recognition because he was the one part where he goes flash going into the wind, and he was. But anyway, I'm not here to say Warrington Gillette was a bad Jason. I'm not here to say Steve Dash was a good Jason. All I'm here to say is that Steve Dash deserves to be billed as Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th Part 2, and that it should have been known as the unmasked Jason as Warrington Gillette. Now, Steve Dash did a great performance in the movie. Warrington Gillette did a great performance for what he had and what he did. But yeah, so in conclusion of I've only doing part 2 in 2 parts, so I might do 3 in 3 parts. But in closing, I would give Friday the 13th out of a 10 rating. I would give it a 6, and not too many. And for some of the dislikes I liked about it, it's kind of like a nitpicking kind of thing in a way, but it's actually a real reason for me anyway. Is that the extra counselors should have had a bigger part in the film. You should have actually included them in get killed, whether they were killed coming back or they were in a car wreck with Ted or whatever. And you know that part, the one part where you think Paul's dead. I mean, there should have been a more explanation about that, or at least show him that he really did die. And that's about it. I mean, the reason why I don't like it as much as the other ones is because it was the one that led up to what the iconic Jason Voorhees was with the hockey mask. And yes, the potato sack, pillowcase, whatever you want to call it, was a great iconic mask because years prior there had been a movie called Town That Dreaded Sundown that had the same kind of sort of mask. And so I mean, I think it's like because you had part 1 and then you had part 2, then you had part 3, so you had that was in between the first 2. The first one made a lot of money and the third one made a lot of money, so the second was like kind of like in the middle. I like it. It's a classic film. It's a classic part of the Friday the 13th franchise and a classic part of the horror film genre. But in my opinion, parts 1 and 3 were actually better. It's hard to pinpoint exactly reason why, other than the 3 has a lot more. How would I say it? It's got a lot more. It has a lot more going for it because of certain characters and the way they portray in part 3 and in part 1 you're opening up the series. So considering Friday 13th 2 and Halloween 2 both came out in 1981 and they both had a cop that like I said before, gets killed with a hammer in the back of the head. I mean, I would consider Friday 13th 2 better than Halloween 2, but yet they're both sort of equal in my opinion. But so I mean, that is my Friday the 13th Part 2 review and discussion. So I hope you enjoyed this video and the prior video. And thank you for subscribing to my channel. I have noticed a lot of people have been watching a lot of my videos. I'm getting a lot of views. Especially got a lot of views on the Memory of Gene Wilder, almost 115 views, which is amazing. I just was doing that just to, show the respect to a great classic actor, and amazing, 115 views. I know there's a lot of other people out there on YouTube that put videos out on there, and they're slowly getting a lot of views too. There's actually a couple that's got over 300 views, but to be 115 views is amazing, and I applaud everybody that gives my videos a thumbs up. And yeah, I do know that there is people out there that can be trolls or do not like certain things and they give a dislike. That's fine and dandy, that's them. But for the people who do like my videos and do enjoy my channel, I thank you. And I will catch you tomorrow. Now tomorrow I was thinking about doing another TV show review, but then as I was thinking about it, maybe I should do another movie, because I haven't done a movie. I did in Humongous, but I haven't done just a regular movie. I'm not going to do a horror movie, and I'm going to try to pick something out that I have not done. And yes, I know in my prior videos I told you I was going to do a movie review of Beastmaster and the Puppet Master series. I do have those lined up, and I do have those planned on to do. But before I do those, I want to rewatch them all so it would be nice and fresh in my mind. Yeah, so this video has rambled on for the past 4 minutes, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will do Friday the 13th Part 3 and a 3-parter next Friday, and I will catch you tomorrow for a surprise movie review later.